anymore. Oh, we're live. Hi, everybody. Charles from GMAT Club and GMAT Ninja here. I'm here to do one of the debriefs I've been most excited about out of all the debriefs I've gotten to do with successful MBA applicants, successful GMAT test takers. I want to introduce you all to John Kreider. He grew up in a trailer in the backwoods of Alaska. We'll talk about Alaska a little bit for any of you who don't have any context for what Alaska looks like. This is about as remote as it gets in North America. Grew up in the backwoods, below the poverty line, first in his family to go to college. And guess what? He just got into Stanford, Wharton, Booth, Kellogg, got some scholarship money for some of those schools. Absolutely killed it in the admissions process, but had a very, very unusual, interesting journey to get there. John, thank you so much for doing this with us.
Charles, appreciate you having me.
Awesome. So what I'd like to do here, if you're watching this live, please ask questions. Madison, absolutely wonderful to see you here. If you have questions, feel free to fire away. Where I want to start, John, just because you have such an unusual kind of early childhood background. We don't meet a lot of people from the backwoods of Alaska who end up at the most elite business schools on earth. For anybody watching who doesn't know what Alaska is like, can you paint a picture of where exactly you grew up and what it was like? What was that upbringing like? And give us a sense of what it felt like to spend a winter in a trailer in Alaska as a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, grew up in Alaska, which is northernmost state that you have in the United States. And that goes, it brings along all the things you'd imagine it would be, very beautiful in the summer, but very, very cold you could have in the winter. I mean, I think when I was an Eagle Scout, and the coldest we ever went camping at was 40 degrees below Celsius. And that's not with wind chill factor, and that, in a little snow hut with one of, the best people I know, Doc Anderson, my Scoutmaster. So, just a very different kind of place. And, I have to give homage to my parents who did all that they could to provide for us and the kids, and to do that, but grew up, with not a lot, comparatively to what, I've ended up, especially seeing my professional career, both in management consulting as well as in private equity. It was a little bit different. So grew up below the poverty line and all the things that go along with that, had free and reduced school lunch and, questions about how long I can make a shirt last, et cetera. Never really believed, coming from a remote place like that I was going to end up at a business school. I didn't really know what a business school was. And hell, I wasn't even necessarily planning on going to an undergrad school. I figured I'd go work in the oil fields, be a, a welder or something like that. And life took me a little bit different direction. Obviously it was, but that was kind of the idea growing up, right? My father's a disabled veteran, and he kind of pushed and, to go towards trades and stuff. He's very, very handy man, worked on a lot of engines and stuff growing up. So, quite a bit atypical, rougher hands. I think that you'd see at most MBA programs.
I love it. So at what point, so nobody else in your family went to college.
That's correct.
Dad's a disabled veteran, you're living in, kind of outside a really, really small town in this frozen place. The expectation is you go into some sort of trade, work in the oil fields, become a mechanic, something like that.
Yeah.
When did that change for you? So at some point you ended up doing undergrad eventually. So how did you get there?
See, it's a good question. So I was lucky enough to, be a smart kid, right? I picked up on reading and stuff like that pretty quick. I think through no fault of, of my own. Just sometimes, you get blessed to have a mind that works. And, in so doing, took a lot of the classes, the biology ones that would be advanced and stuff. And growing up, without a lot of access, if you want to be successful, right, you should be like a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. And that required going to college, right? So that was kind of the thought where it's like, okay, if I know that I can because all of my peers around me say that I can. And then I alluded to him, but my Scoutmaster, Dr. Anderson, was a very big influence in my life. He was a doctor. He was also the local town OBGYN and mayor and Iditarod sled leader and bishop. And it's one of those kind of towns, right? He was the guy who makes flowers and stuff, just so kind of took inspiration there and from my family to say you've got pocket aces. You might as well use it. And so I figured, I'll go to college. That's what smart, successful people do. And figured I was going to go be a doctor, right? That was kind of the idea.
Awesome. Okay. So that seed was planted fairly young. Your parents were really supportive of education.
Very much.
You had sort of the guy in your small town who was doctor, scout leader, florist. For those who don't know,
OBGYN.
OBGYN. John mentioned the Iditarod which you can Google that. It is a infamous, famous, whichever term you want to use, multi-day dog sled race across Alaska. Absolutely epic piece of Alaskan culture. Please look that up. So your local Iditarod sled leader
Yeah.
slash scoutmaster slash OBGYN
Slash,
helped
slash,
inspire you.
slash. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
What a great image. Okay, so tell us about sort of where you went to undergrad, how you got there. You went straight to undergrad after high school, or was there something else there for you?
No, so I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, or at least I got active in it, missionaries, so worked with people with black tags that come talk to you. That's the one I'm a part of. And they got the hooks in me.
For those who don't know, known as the Mormon Church to most people,
Yeah.
or LDS
Yeah.
Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yep, that's
Multiple
yeah,
names.
that's the meeting names. Yeah, and so got into that, and I was a missionary in Colorado for 2 years, and which was a beautiful place. I love Colorado, loved serving the people, was fantastic, and then was lucky enough to be able to get into Brigham Young University, which is a college that is most known for having a very high LDS population. Seemed like a very normal way to do. A lot of my peers and stuff had gone there as well, or had encouraged it, and I didn't know much about what schools were out there. I mean, obviously, you have to live under a rock if you don't know about like Harvard, but also growing up poor, what you hear is there's Harvard or there's UPenn or something, and these are these elite schools, but they're going to cost you $1 million, so you can't go there. And so it didn't even attempt, right? I applied to BYU. My cousin went to Utah State, so I applied there, and I think I applied to a local community college as well.
Okay, awesome. What did you study at Brigham Young?
Genetics and biotechnology, which has nothing to do with what I do now. It's kind of hilarious.
Okay, so then after undergrad, to walk us through your career progression, what did you do after undergrad, and
Yep.
what got you into it?
Yeah, so when I was an undergrad, I wanted to be a doctor, right? So genetics and biotech, worked out to do that. But I was halfway through, doing cancer research and stuff, and I just kind of had that moment of like, I can't be I can't be a scientist. I'm too distracted. I can't move chemicals from one place to the other for 3 hours a day. And so like in desperation, I went to the career counselor, and I said like, what can I do? Can't be a scientist, right? What do I do? And luckily, they were a good career counselor, and they asked more, and I wanted to solve big, fat, hairy, juicy problems. I did genetics and biotech to either be a doctor or like plant science because my grandfather's an Idaho farmer, right? Something, kind of, makes sense. And she said, well, if you like to solve big, fat, hairy, juicy problems, you should look into management consulting. And I was like, what on earth is that? I'd never once heard of like, Bain, McKinsey, like BCG, anything Wall Street was like the bad guys, right? That are trying to, to put the thumb on the small man. So I'd never heard of it, but she said, yeah, you can go solve these problems. And I was like, that sounds perfect. How do I get in? And that started the 2-year journey down the path. That was a lot of case interviews and a lot of figuring out, but was very, very fortunate, lucky, and blessed to end up at Bain & Company and in the Dallas, Texas office after a couple of years of recruiting and resume polishing and 100 different, case interviews and such.
Brilliant. And I know that most people watching this are probably in the middle of their MBA journey and are well past sort of that stage of undergrad where they're trying to figure it out. But honestly, man, good on you for kind of figuring out as early as you did in your undergrad. It sounds like kind of by your junior year, you were going, oh, wait a minute, I'm in a major that doesn't lead to a career that makes sense for me. Let me go talk to people, get some advice, figure it out. It sounds like you're really smart about putting in the work. Probably also helps you out a couple of years of the missionary work ahead of time. You probably understood
it's very nice
life
to know how to work. Yeah.
A lot better than, let's say, I did when I was a junior in college. Okay, so how long were you at Bain?
I was at Bain for 2 years. So started August of 2019. Loved it, enjoyed my time, and along the way, I actually, when I was at Bain, thought it'd be the only job I ever had. Like I was really sold on it and
awesome.
Really enjoyed it. But along the way, I did have some health concerns and problems, and with the pandemic, a lot of the work-life balance got a little bit crazy, and I had a wife and 2 kids at the time. So in order to preserve my health, sanity, and marriage, I figured it makes sense to look for another job at some point, and ended up going to into investing, which oftentimes does not have better work-life balance. But again, sometimes you get pocket aces, and I got that with the fund that I'm at now, KSP Global, that is a phenomenal fund with incredible people that are very they work on the right things, right, and don't require the things they don't need to. And I've learned a ton, and very, very lucky to be here.
Awesome. And how long have you been there? It's been about 2 years.
A little over 2 years. So yeah, it was
Awesome.
October 2021 when I left Bain and started the next day at KSB Global. I work remote for them.
Awesome.
And so I've been there, yes, a little over 2 years now.
Brilliant. Love it. And just a reminder, anybody watching this live, feel free to punch any questions you have for John. Feel free to fire away in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer anything you've got, especially now that we're getting to the MBA part of the journey.
Yeah.
And just one more bit of context before we kind of get into the meat of sort of what made you choose to do an MBA and what did you do along the way to get the admins that you've gotten so far. Tell us a little bit more about your family life. So you mentioned having kids. How old are your kids, and how's that been sort of balancing sort of this stage of your career with the family?
I mean, balance is a hell of a word. I'd say it's more like juggling. There's no static right with this. So I'm a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and a 1.5-month-old. So just had our first daughter, a little bit ago. And my wife Madison, we've been married now for 6 or 7 years. She's the most wonderful woman on earth. Balancing it obviously with careers, it's I mean, the advice that I got, earlier on, especially from a lot of the people at Bain that were in similar situations to me, was that, if you front load your career, then you don't have to front load, you don't have to load up the back of your career, right? So a lot of time and effort put in the beginning pays dividends, and I've certainly seen that in the places that I've been able to go and work. So I mean, it's a juggle, but it's a good juggle. It's the best juggle you could have, right?
And I'm right there with you. And for what it's worth, my kids are my 2 kids are about the same age as your 2 oldest, 6 and 3 in my case. So right there with you with the juggling act. And Madison, props to you, because it sounds like if you're putting up with this guy and all the demands of Bain and career in finance, you're holding up half the sky. So Madison, you're clearly amazing. And now MBA time. So at what point did you start thinking about it, and why? Because it sounds like you landed at a wonderful company. It sounds like post Bain. So what is driving you to do the MBA? What inspired that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I first learned again about MBA programs when I was like recruiting for Bain. This whole world is very new. And so it had always been in the back of, my mind, because it was one of those things. It was kind of a foregone conclusion. Like, right, you go to consulting, it then sets you up for a top MBA program, whatever that might be. And so it always been back of my mind. The timing was always the question that we had there. And some of the rationale, right, for it was, on the first hand, like I said, genetics and biotechnology. And though I loved it, there wasn't like this foundational, fundamental business like education, right? Which you kind of pick up along the way, but the majority of my time at Bain and all of my time at KSV has been remote. So the majority of what I've learned has been, watching over the shoulder, Googling and asking this, and never in like a structured way. Like I've never taken a macroeconomics course. I don't know what that is, right? So I think, something like that would be really good to like learn. So that's a bit of the inspiration there, number one. Number two, there obviously is a calculation to be done that comes with lost income and such like that, especially with the family. But one of my good friends, Ben Johnson, who's out at Wharton, we had this conversation earlier on, and he said, look, like if you look back in 20 years, you're probably not going to regret, right, going to a program, regardless of like the financial impact. If you don't go, you'll always have that tinge of regret. You might as well keep the options open. So there's kind of a bit of that, right? And the third thing is, there's a whole world out there that I just don't know and understand yet. And I know I've got blind spots and weaknesses. I wasn't raised to know what's out there. And I know that the MBA is a time to understand if I want to do a future career and change and pivot, to have that flexibility to do such things. And I think that's very valuable to have. Add the network, of course, on top of that, a network that you can't really get coming from the trailer in Alaska. And it's this, I don't know, the golden chalice that like has all of the stuff you could drink and have your dreams fulfilled, right? Or at least so I assume.
So one of the things you just said, John, that I really love for anybody in the application journey right now, it's really fascinating to me that the first thing you said is sort of the passion for learning more. And kind of being immersed in you didn't say quite these words, but kind of immersed in an environment and a culture where you're around other people who are business minded from different backgrounds, and being there in person with people after basically 4+ years of mostly being remote for most of this time.
Yeah.
that what I find fascinating about that, it seems like a really obvious thing, and I'm sure there are people sitting here going, "Well, of course that's why you go to business school." But asking that question of our students and people doing admissions consulting or tutoring with us over the years, I'd say about a quarter of people maybe even mention that in their top 3 reasons. Usually it's about
Really?
network. Yeah, usually I hear some combination of reasons, a career change, and all of these are totally valid. I am not knocking on any of these at all. But it's a career change. It's, well, I've kind of hit the ceiling at my current job. I don't like my current job anymore. I want out. Oh, I think it'd be fun to be in grad school, which is also totally fair and a really good reason. It might be just about resume building primarily and less about sort of the process of learning and being surrounded by a certain bunch of people. And I can go on,
Yeah.
but usually the learning isn't a top 3 reason for most people we run across. It's in there somewhere. But I think it's fascinating that you bring that up right away. And my wager is that showed up in your applications. Speaking of which,
Yeah.
say more about kind of how all that unfolded for you. When did you start applying? When did you start working on the GMAT? How did all that go for you? What round did you do? Walk us through all that good stuff.
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of the GMAT preparation, luckily when you sign on with Bain and Companies in undergrad, they have a reimbursement amount where you could go study the GMAT. So I took it, you kind of cold, I studied for 2 weeks, probably could have done better, and got a 690 after studying for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, well, yeah. I mean, I'm again very, very lucky to be blessed with some natural inclinations towards test taking. So did that, and then when you're at Bain, they also give you some reimbursement for it. So I applied to some deferred programs because that's what you're told you're supposed to do. Didn't even get the time of day from anyone. And looking back, there's good reasons why. I just made one version of my essay and fired it off and said, well, if they want me, they'll take me. They didn't want me.
So you're saying sorry to interrupt, John.
Yeah.
You're saying you applied to the deferred admissions programs like your senior year at BYU?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct. And didn't get in anywhere. Didn't get even a look anywhere. And so figured what's the next thing to do is probably work on the GMAT. So in the summer before, starting at Bain, I actually tried the GRE for a bit. Couldn't hack the vocabulary because I didn't know big words such as meticulous or fastidious. And then took it again in end of 2019 when there was kind of a winter break between cases. Got a 730. So I was like, okay, well I'm done. There we go. And that ended up not being the case later on. So I was at Bain and did that and didn't necessarily think going from Bain to the MBA program was going to be the thing that I necessarily wanted to do, just because from what I'd heard from a lot of the people at Bain, they're very open about this. There's other career things to look at and explore, and it's a very good launching pad. Bill Wade, one of my mentors there, he's a partner at Bain Dallas. He said that quite frequently. This is a very good launching pad. You use it as such. If you want to launch up in Bain, continue. If you want to launch other places, by all means, right? And so that was very helpful and inspiring to learn and do. So it's kind of on the back burner. But when I joined up at KSB Global was when things became a little bit more real, and it wasn't necessarily a requirement to go get an MBA, but there was a few holes I started to see, right? Like again, my supervisor Andrew, Booth alum, top 3 people on earth, the best supervisor I've ever worked for, and just the way that he understood not only quantitative finance but also organizational psychology. Like there was something there, and I wanted that thing, right? I wanted to be like Andrew, my the partners that I had, Dan, John, Spencer, like they had something and they'd gotten their MBAs, and I figured if I'm going to run with this crowd, right, if I'm going to change from being the person that I was growing up to being a full-fledged professional, especially investment professional, this mark is a very this MBA mark is a very it's an easy option, right, to take and to learn these things, especially professionalism. To the day I die, my feedback every time for where I'm going to score low my jobs is like, John needs to be more professional. It's like, yeah, I know. Okay. Like I get it. I'm a rough stone rolling.
Wait,
what do you do?
Say more. What does that mean? I have a feeling there's some funny stories about goofy things you've done in the break room or wearing your tennis shoes to
right. So actually, so when I first started at Bain and Company, this is especially poignant because I came in and kind of expected everyone to be like the BYU recruiting team at Bain, and it just wasn't necessarily the case. They there was a lot of to no one, not in a negative way, but like a lot of wealth, right, and opulence that I just wasn't aware of. We talk about on your get to know you, where's the place you vacationed, Well, like I went down to my grandfather's farm to like help work the farm, right? Like that was our vacation to get to know the family. You know, somebody say like the Maldives. It's like, oh, I thought that was like a theme park in like Nebraska. I didn't know it was a country, right? I'm very, you know, not so. So there was this gap, right? And you know, in speaking, you know, these people, especially at Bain, and not knowing how to do this, you know, there was a language I didn't know, and that they didn't know how to speak to me because we're in two different spots, and they're like, yeah, you can book the flight that's $100 more if it's a better timetable. I'm like, well, that seems dumb, $100 more. I mean, in my Kellogg essay, especially, I wrote about this. You know, my first, um, you know, my first sit down meal, like a fancy steak house, right? Not like a place with peanuts on the floor, but like a really fancy one. You know, when we sat down and I look at the menu and it's like, oh, like, you know, my drink, the appetizers, and the steak inside I'm going to get is like as much as my family now spends on in a week for food. And that it's just weird cognitive dissonance. It's just hard to get around. And so what I did at Bain, I mean, because I'm a bull in a china shop, is I started to cause problems, and I made an affinity group that was for people like me. We called it One Gen. I think it's now called First at Bain. It's had a few different names, but started out of the office to just get people like me to say, hey, is anyone else feeling this? Because I'm really uncomfortable right now, and I don't know what to do. And there was, it's a very silent, you know, identity, I guess, is the most, you know, common way to say it now. Silent identity, to have that, and you know, building on that at Bain was I think, one, a really good thing for me professionally, and two, you know, gave me a family, right, where we could go and have our Friday lunches and just talk about what's happened, you know, that week, and how we're getting through it. Anything from how do I progress in my career to what brand of shirt can I get, because these are $200, and like, holy cow, that's ridiculous, right?
That's amazing. I love it. Okay, so so you had your eye on the MBA early on,
Yes.
because you're going, okay, there is a thing, there's an expertise, even cultural communication for that matter,
Yeah.
that you're like, hey, to really thrive in this type of environment, this type of workplace, there's a whole lot of things I need to be immersed in, become more comfortable with. It was on your radar screen really early, which is amazing.
Yes.
Without losing kind of that part of your own identity and history as somebody who, you know, first generation going to college, where you're kind of have your support group around that, which I think is amazing. And you're already kind of going, okay, how do we get to the MBA? 690 GMAT, senior year of college, 730, kind of halfway or partway into your first year at Bain.
Yep.
And then that wasn't the end of it, because that was 2019. So what
Yep.
happened from there?
So yeah, so I was, when I'd done at Bain as a KSV, I you know, had done well and had some quick, you know, very good wins with some portfolio companies, investments we made, and was feeling, you know, like it's about the time, right? I've got enough arrows in my cap, or feathers in my cap, arrows, whatever the word is there. I have the accolades such that I could consider these programs, and had gotten the advice, especially at, you know, a lot at Bain. There is kind of this idea and culture that you should shoot for the stars first, whatever those stars are, and then go somewhere else if the stars don't work out, which I do have a bit of a problem with now that I'm on the other side, but that's for another time. And so, you know, when I'm at KSB, I said, I'm going to apply to Harvard and Stanford and do that first. That's what everyone says they ought to do. And I, you know, with my 730 charged in and wrote, you know, the essays and stuff. And luckily, one of the partners at my fund was very helpful in doing so, and secured an interview at HBS.
Awesome.
And nothing at Stanford for this. This was not this year, but like last year's round one. And got rejected after the interview from Harvard Business School, which was kind of a blow. It's like, okay, well, that sucks. I guess, you know, what do you do? And had, you know, some, you know, kind of, you know, imposter feeling there again, where it's like, okay, they found out, like, I don't belong, like, it's clear I don't belong. But then, you know, went through a lot of, you know, sort of Stoic philosophy of like, well, does the world actually matter? What does their opinion do? Like, you know, who are you, and how does that actually work? And, you know, I decided I was going to try again, and not necessarily apply for the other schools. Again, this was kind of, I think, along the, I think, incorrect ideology of like shoot for the stars only. And then also I got the news in like December. Round two is coming up in January. I didn't feel confident that I could like sprint and get, you know, an application that's worthy of putting in at, you know, something such as Kellogg or Wharton.
So John, so just to clarify,
Yeah.
so your rejections from HBS and Stanford come
Yep.
in December 2022.
That is correct. Yes.
And then you have a matter of weeks, or maybe even a few days, before you could submit, you know, if you want to apply to Wharton, Booth, Kellogg, MIT, Columbia, wherever else, you could, in theory, have done it after those rejections came in, but you only had a week or two, and it's over the holidays, and you have little kids that get excited.
And I'm obviously like a bit depressed, like, dang, I had a shot. I'm not good enough, right?
Yeah.
That thought of like, you're not good enough to do this, like, stop trying, very prevalent, right? And worked on that, you know, for a while. I mean, I think that I'll obviously, you know, like I do believe I got good mental health, but like it gnaws at you, right? Because like I was sitting there, you know, I was at Harvard. I sat down, we had an interview. I thought it went well. We laughed, which is uncommon for Harvard. I was like, I got this. I cinched it. My friends are there. As I walked out of the Spangler building, you know, Shaq gives me a hug. Like it's like, okay, it worked, right? My buddy Shaq Walker, he just graduated there. So like I was like, okay, like nailed it, and no, didn't nail it. So kind of sad. But
sorry to interrupt again, John. Counterpoint
please.
here: the fact that you came close, like if obviously this isn't the end of the story anyway, but the fact that you came that close, you got an interview at Harvard. The interview went well. I think everybody here is aware of how freaking unbelievably hard it is to get into HBS. The fact that you came close is so impressive. That I know that's not how you think in the moment. Rejection's rejection,
right?
Hard, and especially when you're coming from a place like Bain or anywhere kind of an elite, you know, finance consulting, you're surrounded by people who went to schools like that. It feels like a failure, and I don't want to minimize that feeling.
Right.
But I also, anybody watching,
there's an upside. Yeah,
is going to have these moments where it's like, oh, I got interviewed and didn't get in. It happens to so many people, and it's like, dude, you came really close to getting into HBS. That's incredible. So for what it's worth,
right,
that by itself is an achievement, and I realize there's more to come. Okay, so you decided screw round 2 this year in 2022. I'm going to regroup, kind of think about, you know, learn from this experience, move on. And so that brings us into the current cycle, 2023. You start gearing up for round 1. So talk to us about that process.
And so kind of early that year, I said, okay, now I know I didn't get in. Fair. Why is that? And tried to be very introspective, you know, went through essays, went through all the bits and pieces, and came up with a few parts. Like, you know, number 1, like easiest quantifiable, GMAT. You know, if you look at Harvard's median, I think it's now 740, and GSB's at the time was a 740 at 730. And like, not for nothing, but like straight white Christian conservative, ex-consulting, private equity, bro, male, like that's a talent pool that will typically score above median, or so I've been told. I don't know for sure. So, you know, if you stack me against my peers, I'm not top percentile. So, okay, it's something I could do there. Number 1. Number 2, I think recommenders. I mean, I worked for one of the most wonderful men on earth, Nathan Rogg at Bain and Company. And he wrote one of my letters of recommendation, but I wasn't like the top best guy at Bain, you know, solid midline performer, right? So, okay, like it's going to be hard to write. Like Nathan is not going to lie. He's not going to say John's the best AC I've ever seen. Like, never. So, okay, I have the chance now. Am I fun to be that guy? So let's do better there, right? So could get a better letter of recommendation. Essays as well, you know, could be more thoughtful and reflective. Now that I look back on my Stanford essay, it's like, no wonder I didn't get interviewed. Like, what a joke. Like, you know, I wrote to what I thought the AdCom wanted to hear instead of actually truly answering the prompt, right? And so, you know, I made these decisions. I'm going to work on all of these things that are within my you know, my power, and do what it's going to take to like get all of the, you know, if there's a hole in my armor, let's patch that sucker up, right? And figure that's going to be what I was going to go, you know, do. So the GMAT journey was, you know, in the beginning of 2023, and I took it 3 times to try and get hired. So went through like the target test prep, and then a bunch of your online verbal stuff. Anyone who's watching, this guy's the GOAT. Like, you need to look at the verbal stuff. It got me a 48, and I over the moon, like incredible stuff.
Thank you, John.
So absolutely. And so started studying in earnest for that. Got a 740. And then another 740 just after that, where my verbal and quant was like flipped. And eventually it was like, okay, you know, just the worst feeling, right? And then I took it then at home test and got a 760. And I was like, okay, we're done. We did it. Like, never again will I have to understand if that is sufficient or not, at least in the GMAT, right? Professionally, perhaps, but not now. So got that one done. The second thing is I tried to be very particular about kind of going a bottoms up strategy on like what my letter of recommendation wanted to be. And I was very blessed to have a portfolio company to work with. And the CEO of that portfolio company, his name's Brett. Brett is like the best guy on earth. And we, you know, worked together. I was kind of his chief of staff at this company, doing a lot of stuff to help it out. And so he wrote me a letter of recommendation as I was a dual like associate case fee and at this company, kind of working and doing a lot of like the stuff to help out with sales and marketing, especially. And so it was a bit of a differentiated letter of recommendation, right? Because he was like, I am the CEO of like a private equity backed company. This kid is worth his salt. Like, you need to take him, right? And that was very helpful to not just have your standard, I'm a partner at Bain, I'm a partner at KSV, and I'm this or that, to kind of throw into letter of recommendation.
Wow, John. Okay, so explain that a little bit more. So,
Yeah,
private equity company. So you still have your full-time role as an associate in the private equity company,
that's correct. Yeah.
and then is when you were kind of serving in this chief of staff role for the portfolio company,
Yeah.
was that something you were doing essentially as a side hustle, or was that considered part of your job in at the private
Considered part of the job, right? So
Awesome.
I work primarily in growth equity, and the markets for 2023 are pretty down, right? And so you've got a little bit of extra time, not a lot, but like enough to say, hey, I was a consultant at Bain, well, an associate consultant at Bain. I don't know everything, but I know enough on how to make some dashboards. I know how to to take our data and do something cool with it to get some more insights. All of that stuff that could very much help a lower middle market Midwestern manufacturing company, right? And so, as as part of it, I'm not in the live diligence. Well, okay, I'm going to go help out Brett. I'm going to go do something there, and I'm going to try and grow this company because I want the fund to succeed, right? A little bit of initiative on my end to go and do that. Not really, it was sort of a sign, but also, I mean, when you look at it, it's like there's so much there. I bet I can go do something. Hey boss, can I go try it out? Yeah, sure. All right, here we go. Right. So it was kind of that sort of a story when I went to go to help them out in this sort of chief of staff role.
Awesome. Okay. And the one great question we've gotten from the audience from Cliff, were there any weaknesses in your application? How did you overcome them? He actually asked that question about 20 minutes ago, and I think you just nailed it. But I guess, are there any other weaknesses that you perceived, either in the latest round,
Yeah.
or in that round that was unsuccessful for you in 2022?
I mean, you can always say I'd like a higher GMAT, or always say a higher GPA or whatever. But yeah, my weaknesses in the earlier one was certainly like letter of recommendation, not being as thoughtful on the essays. I think was an important thing. I also think my weakness, like frankly, was not enough self-reflection. I mean, now looking at it, looking back now, I visited the Kellogg, campus, took a class there with my buddy Wes Bosco. Amazing. Like, I loved Kellogg. It was incredible. I would love to be there. Went with my buddy Ben Johnson over to Wharton, toured it, talked to people. Oh my gosh, can you imagine going? It's incredible. It's incredible. It's an incredible school. So I think I was blinded by top-down thinking that I did not validate going bottoms up. Right? I didn't sit down and say, what do I want to do and where do I want to end up and who's going to get me there? If I'd done that, I would have been incredibly happy to end up at at any of the schools that I applied to. Very much so. So I think that was a weakness that I had in the application. I have to think deeper if there was more, but probably.
And Don, I'd love to hear more. So I love what you're saying about the introspection, because again, like what is this whole business of the essays and the admissions people? You go to the dog and pony shows, the info sessions, and they'll say, "Oh, we look at you as a whole person."
Self. Yeah.
And you kind of go, it sounds, I think to most ears at first, it sounds political. It sounds a little bit hollow. Well, the GMAT's just part of your application. Okay. And all this stuff kind of, I don't know, it doesn't sound very meaningful, I think, the first few times you hear it.
Right.
But where it's really true, and one of the things that, that anyone who's been kicking around, watching applicants do this, year after year, you kind of go, yeah, the ones who really have a really solid grounding in why they're doing this, what they want from it, understanding of what schools they're targeting, why they belong there, they outperform massively compared to, let's say, their GPA, procedure, their employment.
Oh, really? How do you know?
Cool. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because it comes across, right? If you have not done your homework, you don't really understand, if you're applying to Wharton just because it's highly ranked, but you have no real reason why you think that's a fit for you, or no particular affinity for it. And not a lot of introspection about why this is the right thing for you right now, then it comes across in your application, comes across in your interviews, if you're just kind of chasing a name. But when there's something really there and you go, oh yeah, no, here's what I want to achieve in my life and my career. Here's how Wharton fits into it, specifically Wharton, or name, insert school name here. Some of the best applications I've ever seen. Actually, I know a few people who went to Cornell years ago who just had this amazing depth of understanding of Ithaca, New York, and what happened on that Cornell campus. And I had somebody who was, an Indian female applicant on the older side. She was in her early 30s. Her career was fine, but she was kind of a marketing person who'd done all right, not much of an undergrad background.
Yep.
640 GMAT, which was incredibly low for that demographic. And she gets an interview at Cornell, which was an achievement. She wrote great essays. I mean, because it was really this genuine, like, here's what I want to do in my career. And it was really personal in a real way. And she goes to her interview, and somebody asks, hey, hey, how are you liking Ithaca since you're up here? It's like, oh, I've visited here a few times now. And I always like, and I'm going to botch the details, so anybody who's attended Cornell can yell at me. But I always love the chimes on the roof of the library. I like going for a walk there in the morning because I think the roof tiles are double as wind chimes. And again, I might be botching those details. Somebody from Ithaca can yell at me.
That's so specific. I love it.
And and totally genuine. I mean, this woman did not have an ungenuine bone in her body. Lovely human. And really, that's what she did visiting Ithaca. Was she would go for a walk in the morning, and she loved kind of sitting there and listening to the wind chimes. And the interviewer, and it was somebody on the AdCom who'd been at Cornell for years, was like, the what? I didn't even know about that. And and that's like the first line. And it's just like, wow, this woman is going to love being at Cornell if we let her in. And of course,
that's
they let her in.
Great.
And she's done great, and she's killing it in her career. And so that sort of thing really matters. And so hearing you talk about that introspection and kind of going, yeah, I needed to really kind of dig a little bit deeper. Yeah, it matters. And it's not to say that people can't get in with something that's thinner or less personal, but you're going to punch above your weight if you really can make the case, hey, here's who I really am. You come across the three-dimensional person and your essays, which I have a feeling you did. Especially in this later round, that stuff really matters. So I think you had the right process and kind of thinking deeply about it. You mentioned the Stanford essays from the unsuccessful round back in 2022, no interview. You applied in 2023, round one, got in. Tell us about the difference in those essays. How'd you approach them differently? Can you give us a little bit of a sense?
Oh, I mean, tell me about the difference between orange juice and toothpaste, right? So, I mean, it's a night and day, really. So when I wrote it originally, I had written. Let me take one step back. One piece of advice that I've heard oft repeated that I've grown to disagree with is that the Harvard and Stanford essays are basically the same thing. I disagree with that. Reason because of that is because when I wrote my essays for last round, the round I didn't get in 2022. I tried to repurpose my HBS essay into my Stanford one and wrote it around like what's most important. It's like growth, right? And why Stanford? Oh, well, it's the best because it's got these classes and all of these things, right? And looking back, and I had some people talk to me about what to do differently. When I didn't get to Stanford, especially, and I actually wasn't terribly keen on going to Stanford because I was arrogant and pissed off they didn't interview me. So this time around, I decided, I'm going to be genuine. I'm just going to say what I actually think, not what somebody has told me, not what a friend has told me. I'm going to write down what I want to write down. So what matters most and why? I said, well, my family and being a good father. Why is that? Bit of a rough upbringing. And then, figured that I wanted to provide for my family in a way that is not the same. And along with that, I wrote about my reasoning for leaving Bain, right? I wrote about health challenges, and I wrote about finding balance and about why that was so important, and how I found myself in an ER thinking I had a heart attack, and that was not good enough. I'm not going to sacrifice my life for that, so I'm going to leave. And ironically, I wrote this story about leaving Bain, right, as my Stanford essay, because what mattered most was being a present father. So I was very real, and I kind of had this chip on my shoulder, and I said, you know what, if they don't like it, then that's on them. I don't care. I'm going to put myself out there, and if they don't like it, okay, cool. Then I don't like them either, and I don't need their validation, right? And then on the why Stanford, advice that I'd gotten there was to be less Stanford is the best and more about I see myself having a path, and I know that Stanford's going to be a part of that path. Whether or not that stone is there, I'm going to be successful, but here's what I'm going to go do, and here's how I'm going to change the world. Stanford loves changing the world, right? So I wrote about this essentially this idea that I'd want to pursue, and we'll see if I end up doing it, about creating financial literacy tools for people that were like me, right? Tools that were hyper specifically designed for someone who gets food stamps, right? That doesn't exist right now. And talked about what that might look like and how I know Stanford is the best place for me to learn how to do that. And then talked a bit after that about why I thought I fit there, the people that I've talked to, the classes that they have, the way it will teach me not only to be successful in business, but also to change the world. That's the last part of their motto. So I wrote that. My revisions for Stanford previous round 2022, hours, so long trying to get it just right and getting the words right. This time I think I drafted it 4, 5 times, 5 hours of work. I just didn't care enough to say what I thought they wanted to say. I was just going to say what I was going to be and say. And I mean, again, sometimes you get dealt pocket aces, right?
Was it, who was giving you advice through all this? I have more to say about what you did with those Stanford essays. I think it's phenomenal on a bunch of levels. So did Stanford. Were you working with a consultant? Were there
No.
some of the people you worked with helping
Yeah,
out?
so no consultants to do. I mean, having 3 kids is enough drain on the wallet. So didn't want to have the budget. I did have various friends, right, that were at each of the schools or alumni of those schools. I mean, very luckily, the CEO of that company that I worked for, chief of staff, well, he had a very close friend who had gone to the GSB, and he had connected me, and they said, hey, I'll look over your stuff. It wasn't terribly in depth, but like enough to get nuggets of advice that would work, right? And with the advice I'd gotten previously, like it was the same thing, had come from a few HBS and GSB students, and I mean, I'll admit that they punch above their weight. They're incredible people, and will be much more successful in their careers than I would hope to be. So it took I don't think they're necessarily wrong, but it didn't work for me, right? And ironically, this time around, I did a similar-ish thing for applying to HBS and didn't even get interviewed for HBS this round 1, right? So it's like it's just, and you flip the coin a bit. Didn't happen, but the best part was like the journey along the way about the introspections, like that was okay. Because at the end of the day, if I look into myself, like, am I really going to be the kind of guy who's going to thrive in the case method environment? Perhaps, but I don't have any evidence of that, and I don't know if I read terribly well for long periods of time, right? I get distracted, and that's actually why I really like Wharton, experiential, hands-on, that first class, right, that they would have on on being an effective manager and the simulation. Like I get that, right? And so it wasn't any hair off my back this time around because I knew what I was looking for, right? I was very bottoms up. And if it didn't happen, okay, cool. It works for me, right?
John, this is amazing because what you're describing here, and I don't think we have all that many admissions committee people who watch this kind of thing, but if they are, and we'll probably send it out to a few people that have connections to GMAT Club and say, hey, please watch this, because what I'm hearing is the admissions process gone right for everybody. And what I mean by that is, so everything we were saying earlier about when you're truly authentic, and I know when you hear from the admissions committee, it just sounds like blah, blah,
gosh,
blah.
it's yeah.
It sounds so thin, and that's not a shot at admissions committees because they mean it, but it sounds like nothing to applicants' ears. Understandably, like what does that really mean? It's like, well, I see all these people who have these careers in this, and this, and job applications are. Is it the right thing to be authentic, or do you need to say what the hiring manager wants to hear? Boy, that becomes a gray area. I think to a large degree,
right.
You need to say what they want to hear. That's how the world works a lot of the time. And so it's cognitive dissonance when somebody says, oh, be authentic. Yeah, but I'm trying to show that I'm awesome enough to be at this amazing MBA program. And that feels like a very different exercise than being authentic. But again, they really mean it. And they are looking for fit. They're not just looking for, hey, we're going to get the most elite people to fill our class and that's it. They're saying, yeah, you need to be somebody who's going to achieve really well, in the business world post-MBA in this program as well, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to make sure that this is somebody who is going to be happy here and have it be a fit. And it sounds like in kind of saying, hey, here's who I am. Here's what motivates me. I'm a family guy. I've had some health scares. I'm looking for balance. There's ways in which I want to change the world, but I also have had a whole set of life experiences here. And, for whatever reason, Harvard looked at that and said, yeah, that doesn't fit here right now. Cool.
Fair,
Great. They might
awesome.
have done you a favor because you might not have loved it.
Man, if I had gone to Harvard and Stanford and I had to decide between them, I would be crippled with decision fatigue. I wouldn't know what to do. No, I mean, because the star power, it's just so bright, right? Like it's just,
And Stanford said, no, you fit with who and what we want to be. And so this is the process, I think, working really well, partly because you took the task of saying, I'm going to be truly authentic, answer these questions for real. Sounds like you had awesome advice from people and you didn't have to pay for it, which is amazing and nice, wonderful. Yeah. And anybody out there watching this, yeah, there's great admissions consultants out there. I know tons of them that I think are magnificent at a bunch of different companies. And not everybody needs to spend that kind of money. And I think you're a great case of it, John. And I think spending all that time introspecting and being around a lot of smart people and asking for their advice, I think you nailed this process. And it is really cool to hear you tell the story this way, because you absolutely nailed the process. Obviously, the outcomes worked out too, but it's really cool and really refreshing, because I think you dug deep in ways that I think are incredibly refreshing and incredibly cool.
I appreciate
all right.
that.
What I think we've danced around, haven't said exactly. Just walk us through the admissions decisions. I know we've kind of echoed a few of them, but Harvard rejected, Stanford admitted. Take us through the rest of them real quick, and then we can talk about where you are now in the decision process.
Love it. Yeah. So I admitted to Chicago Booth as well. They were kind enough to offer me $100,000 scholarship, which was incredibly humbling, I guess. I don't expect such things, right? Kellogg as well. I was lucky to get into Kellogg, and they placed me into their advanced private equity experience class as well, and they offered an $80,000 scholarship as well. Which again, I mean, I'm moved to tears, right? It's like kid like me. I don't know it's still deserving, but apparently I think it is, right? Got into the Wharton School as well, and enjoyed time there. Nothing with scholarship, but that's like, okay, cool. Like that's fine to be able to walk the Huntsman. Is going to be I mean, worth it alone. And I actually got waitlisted at Duke, ironically. So a couple of people I've worked with, my partner, my fund, and other people, they'd gone to Duke and loved it, and they talked about fit, and I thought, like I could probably fit here. Like it sounds awesome. Got waitlisted. So what do you do? That's fine. I'm not gonna, again, be upset with it. But that's where it all ended up with this year.
And so, what are you thinking now? Have you made the decision yet, or are you still thinking through it?
It's funny to say. As of literally yesterday. And again, I'm a very religious man. So after a lot of introspection and prayer, my wife and I felt very good, and we'll be attending Stanford.
Awesome.
And going there. Coming up in September of next year.
Awesome. I love it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, John. I think that's probably a pretty good ending place. Anything else that so for people watching, for anyone who's stuck with us through, 45 plus minutes, thank you so much for sticking with us. Any advice for applicants? I think most people who are going to watch this whole thing are going, ooh, how do I do what John did? Any other bits of advice for folks who are going through this journey?
I think there's one bit that I guess I still struggle with, but if I could tell myself to do it earlier on and get the mojo around I'd want to have, and that's around, X factor and star power. Like, especially for Stanford, you hear there's supposed to be some sort of like big X factor, do something, big. And not that, I think that everyone has to change the world before going or to that effect, but I've been helping a couple of my buddies now look at essays and stuff like that. And there seems to be this kind of inclination to not really sell the best parts of themselves, right? To keep it a little bit closer to the chest, to kind of, put it in more formal tone, or to, kind of bury the lead, if you will. I would genuinely believe that anyone who, has the right ability and stats and background, like, is a good, like, person that could apply to and arguably get into, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Kellogg, Booth. And I would recommend, like, getting very personal and deep about the things that are very important, and to realize that you do have like an X factor with it, right? Like with Stanford, I wrote about those things. With Kellogg, that story I told you about the steak, I wrote about that, right? I wrote about going to Bain and how I'm going to change it. At Booth, I wrote about how, my from my mom's line, my family were pioneers, and I'm a different kind of pioneer, and here's how I've broken the chain, right? And done those things. For Wharton, a similar story about how I'm going to fulfill, my dreams by doing this, what I'm going to bring. So I think that there's so much varnish and polish. I'm just not a polished guy, and I think that moving that away allows you to not only be authentic, but it also like lets you understand that, like, like you got star power, you got the X factor. Like, I'd love to see you all there at Stanford with me. Like, I don't think you can't, right? I think it's very possible, but I think I don't know. I'm not saying to throw out advice from other people and admissions, consultants, but like, I don't know, being real worked for me. Survivor's, bias, but it worked.
And I think that's totally fair. Think about the people on these admissions committees reading thousands of applications every season, and a lot of them are over polished and lack sort of the personal touch. So if you can write something that's readable and a good piece of writing, but is deeply personal, I think you got something there, John.
Yeah.
And last quick question for you. What do you think you're going to be doing after business school?
Oh man, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, I love my fund, the people I work with. I could very easily see myself, coming back to that fund. I've also, I mean, again, I joined Bain because I wanted to solve big, fat, hairy, juicy problems, and I do really enjoy the private equity world. I could very easily see myself joining on a private equity portfolio operations team, right? Going as the VP and getting deployed out to a bunch of Midwestern manufacturing companies, be with the good old boys, and to make them grow. I can see that. Wife and 3 kids, like a bit risk averse, but there's something about entrepreneurship that just calls to me, like it's just there and it keeps nagging me. So I think that financial tool I talked about could be a very good place to start. And then if none of those, then this is a bit out of left field, but I think something in like luxury travel would be fun, because as I've now been a Bainian private equity, I like know the world now, and it's like this is really cool. I would love to like do like operations of like hotel and real estate. You see how that, like I think it'd be fun to play with, right? So we'll see.
I love it. We got to get you back on here in 2 or 3 years, as once you graduate from Stanford, and see where you're at. John Kreider, you are amazing. Thank you so much for doing this with us, and everybody, thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.